welcome into the 247 Sports College Basketball Show. I'm your host, Adam Finkelstein. And before we get going, make sure you like, share, and subscribe this show. And also a very special thank you to all of you who've tuned in for the last 2 weeks. 50,000 people watched this show 2 weeks ago. Last week, it went up to 70,000 people. So thank you so much, and we hope you continue to enjoy this content we bring you each and every week. On this week's show, we are obviously going to preview the Final Four matchup that takes place this Saturday with the finals on Monday. Then we're going to talk about the teams who did not make it and if they have reached pivot points. We're talking about some of the biggest blue bloods in college basketball, whether or not they need to pivot away from their current strategy. Last but not least, we are going to talk about the McDonald's All-American game, which tips off tonight, Tuesday night, after 3 full days of practice in front of NBA scouts. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in Chris Walker and Isaac Trotter to help us break down this Final Four matchup. Fellas, welcome back to the show.
What's up, brother?
All right, now here's my question. Well, it's more of a statement. Kevin Keats and I go back a long way, back to Hargrave Military Academy. But if it were not for him, this would have been my best bracket all time because I had Duke going with these other three. How are you guys doing on your respective brackets?
Well, I'm terrible. So I lost. Tennessee was my last chance of having any type of respectability as being a college basketball analyst and an so-called expert on the brackets. It was, again, I'm happy for Matt Painter. I wanted that story, that narrative to end, but that was the end for me. Shed going down. I actually, Jack Golke ended my whole thing because I had Kentucky winning the whole thing, to be honest with you. So, I was done first weekend.
All right, we're getting to pivot points later. Hold that thought. Trotter, how are you doing with the bracket?
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel great about my bracket because picking Purdue and UConn to make the Final Four, wow, bold move there by me to take two of the best teams in college basketball to make it. You know, the other two that I was honing in on were Duke, which I felt great about heading into that Elite Eight game, and then we saw how that turned out. And then Arizona, I thought that they had a really good chance. I didn't think Carolina was going to come out of that region. I just picked wrong. And so Arizona and Duke were the two teams that I had going, and they didn't make it either. So, okay, I get a little credit for having Purdue and UConn in there, but I just don't feel like that's really going out of my comfort zone to pick those two teams.
All right, well, let's talk about the 4 teams who are in it. Obviously, UConn and Purdue, they've been 2 of the top teams in college basketball all season long. Seem like they are on a crash course for what would be one of the most anticipated finals in a long time. But first, Alabama and NC State waiting in the wings. Let's begin with a look at this UConn-Alabama matchup, guys. I'm going to set the tone here a little bit. These are 2 coaches that know each other very, very well. Dan Hurley, when he was the coach at the University of Rhode Island, one of the most important recruits of his tenure was a guard from Michigan named E.C. Matthews. His high school coach was someone by the name of Nate Oates. Shortly after he committed to Rhode Island, Nate Oates joined the staff at Buffalo, where the head coach was named Bobby Hurley. When Bobby Hurley left for Arizona State, Nate Oates became the head coach at Buffalo. He did so well, he was hired at Alabama. These two have a connection. They share thoughts analytically. I think they even work with the same third-party analytic company. At least I know they did in the past. So these are 2 teams that are now on a crash course for what should be a very entertaining semifinal game. Chris, I want to talk to you first. Who do you like in this matchup and why?
Listen, obviously the overwhelming favorite, shall I say, will be UConn. I mean, let's just face it. They have every single thing that you need. They bust the seams on all the metrics. Klingon inside. I still don't know what Brad Underwood was thinking trying to attack Klingon at all. But at the end of the day, they have Samson Johnson coming off the bench if Klingon happens to struggle or gets in foul trouble. So they have a situation where they have depth there. Diarra coming off the bench, 6th man of the year in the Big East. They have depth. 2 of the best guards in the country, Cam Spencer and Trisha Newton. Newton, obviously a first-team All-American. So they have every single thing. And Caravan, who I believe was their unsung hero last year, really still hasn't really shown his ability to do what he can do best. And he's a wild card in a lot of ways, along with Stephon Castle, who people are predicting to be a lottery pick. I say all that to say this team seems to be unbeatable. I was challenged on a set the other day saying, is it one of the most unbeatable teams ever? And I'm like, guys, like, UNLV that lost to Duke in the Final Four, Georgetown that Villanova beat Georgetown in '85. There's some teams that people thought were in, the Phi Slamma Jamma team, or the Duke teams, the Christian Laettner Duke teams that I thought were invincible. So comparing those teams to this UConn team has a chance to go back to back, it's tough for me knowing what I know. It's like talking about LeBron and Jordan. Like, that's tough for me in that argument. You know what I'm saying?
I just think that's premature too. Like, let's get to Tuesday. Like, let's
Yes.
talk about UConn and Alabama first. And then if we get past that, we can talk about UConn and Purdue, or UConn and NC State. And then if we get to Tuesday and they're holding the trophy again, then all of us talking heads can go on for months about whether this was the best UConn team or not. But until they win 2 more games, that conversation is premature. That's just my take.
And let me say this too, like, in the world of college basketball is so different now. I'm not going to say it's easier to do what Danny's doing, because think about it, he wasn't picked in the top 25 last year, won the NCAA tournament. He wasn't even picked to win the Big East this year, picked third. And he's looked like one of the most invincible teams ever. I think because of the landscape, and you put the right roster together, certainly giving him credit, he can do it. But let me just make one comment about Alabama and Nate Oates. Nate Oates, people don't realize, or people forget, was the number 1 overall seed last year with Brandon Miller. And I'm thinking, like, there's no way he can duplicate or replicate the success of last year. And he takes Mark Sears, lose Kennerly, and just lose a couple of other really nice pieces. And Jaden Bradley, who's at Arizona, and Noah Clowney, and look what he's doing. And what I say is, and you spoke about analytics, I believe, and basketball is a copycat league, fast followers. The way he's playing with the 3-point shot and the analytics, people laugh about it. But guys, I'll tell you this. People say Alabama doesn't play defense. And you know what my response to that is? Okay, you know what the best defense is? Scoring 90. That's the best defense. So you can talk all you want about what they don't do guard-wise. And I'll say the last thing is, in the SEC, they were the second best 2-point team percentage-wise as well. So it's a little bit fuddy-duddy. You get up and down. That's what hurt Carolina. You get up and down with them, and they can get these threes going. And as Jay Wright says, shoot them up and sleep in the streets. It's like golf. It's not how many. It's not how many. It's not how. It's how many. Even if they shoot a bad percentage, if they can get to 15 threes, look out, UConn, if you struggle like you did in the beginning of the Illinois game.
All right, Isaac, what do you think about that?
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth, because I do think there's a number offensively that Alabama can get to with these threes. UConn's won games and they're blowing everybody out. They haven't shot the ball very well from 3-point range. So if we're getting to a gap there where Alabama gets that 13, 14, 15 3-pointer range, and UConn has to make 30 points up in another area of the floor, that changes things. But for me, it really comes down to when Alabama misses threes, because the secret sauce behind this Alabama offense has been their offensive rebounding. And UConn is phenomenal in transition. Those long shots, long rebounds. Every time Alabama takes a three, it's going to be a war on the glass, because if UConn can get those loose balls and get those long rebounds, it's a bucket on the other end, because they run the floor, and they don't just run the floor once in a while. For all 40 minutes, they sprint the floor. And so if Alabama is able to get those offensive rebounds on those long shots, on those threes, and gets another opportunity, I think that's where Alabama can start to make this game plan work, because you have got to keep UConn out of transition or you have no hope.
Listen, the 3-point line is obviously an equalizer for Alabama. With the amount they shoot when they're going in, they're capable of beating anyone on any given night. We said that 2 weeks ago, and it has come to fruition. But I think for me, the X factor in this game is Grant Nelson, because we've seen 2 vastly different players here in the NCAA tournament. The first week of the tournament, he did nothing. He had 3 points in each of the first 2 rounds games, was essentially a non-factor. Now in the Sweet 16, that guy looked like a first-round pick. He comes out, he's got 25, 11, and 5, I think, and he shows at 6'11" the versatility to pull opposing big men away from the basket, because he was making shots, which is huge. We know everybody in Alabama's got the green light. He is going to be encouraged to shoot that ball against UConn and try and drag Donovan Clingan away from the basket. If Grant Nelson is making threes, it will open up a lot of things for Alabama. And don't forget, he is also a very good handler and passer. So he's going to try and attack Donovan Clingan off the dribble and see if he can get him in foul trouble. That's another subplot of this game. Does Nelson make threes, and does he get Clingan in foul trouble? 2 things to keep an eye on. Final thoughts on this game. Chris, you first with a pick on who will win.
Listen, you took the words right out of my mouth about Grant Nelson, but they play small. And then don't forget that Wrightsell will be available as well, who's their best percentage three-point shooter. So, again, it's going to be 5 out all game long. And I continue to say this. It happened with Marquette. It happened in other games. When you can't shoot the three, and some of these teams are very good defense. I'm sorry, they're so deep that they, like Purdue shot 3 for 15 and still beat Tennessee. I just don't believe that those type of outputs defensively will happen again. Obviously, they had the big fella Ziti, just take over the game. But I say that to say, and the point was already made by Zach, is that if they struggle to shoot the basketball, I continue to tell people this is about matchups. Both really good coaches. If they struggle to shoot the basketball, Alabama can get off to a really good start, because the thing about Alabama is it can happen at any given time the same way it can happen for UConn. They're both explosive teams. I don't think UConn is going to meet a team that can be as explosive as Alabama. And I think you make the greatest point. If they don't rebound the basketball, I think if you don't, as Zach made it, if you don't rebound the basketball against this team, it's going to be a struggle to get Tristan Newton in transition, because that's when he's best. And he didn't have a great game against Illinois. So for me, it comes down to UConn's dominance on the glass. And I don't think Nate Oates is going to be like Brad Underwood and have his ego in check and say, hey, we're going to attack Donovan Clingan. He's going to say, we're going to pull Kling Kong out from the perimeter, and he's going to have, and we're going to miss, and we're going to continue to shoot. That is our advantage. There is no other way we can win this game. Right. And they're going to let Clingan throw it inside and let him shoot every single time, because he's not as good as Zach Edey at scoring. So I would take away the shooters on a perimeter. And then again, if they get into a shootout match with Alabama and get out of character, which I don't think Danny will let them do, it's going to be like watching tennis going back and forth. And then in a fast game, a lot of people talking about UConn. I'm taking Alabama in a track meet. I'm going to take Alabama.
All right, Isaac, who you got?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to how disciplined UConn is offensively, because North Carolina got away from their bread and butter to start that second half. They did not drive the basketball. They shot a lot of threes and turned it into a jump shooting contest at the beginning of the second half. And that really burnt them. I think if UConn is able to put pressure on the rim every single trip down the floor, like paint touches, drives off the bounce, make these Alabama smaller guards defend multiple actions, make them fight through all of these screening actions that UConn is going to put them through, make them fight through the blender, right? Like that's what UConn puts you in, a blender. Can Alabama guard for 23, 24, 25 seconds without making a mistake that leads to a bucket inside? If UConn is able to get to the rim at will and continues with that game plan for all 40 minutes, I think UConn has enough in the tank to get this one done.
I'm just not willing to bet against UConn until somebody beats them. I said I think the game plan for Alabama to score the upset here is to make a lot of threes and get Grant Nelson going. For UConn, I think it's a couple of things, and this is one point we haven't talked about yet. When you're guarding a team that wants to play drive and kick basketball, that wants to shoot a lot of threes and run their actions to get to the threes, it comes down to guarding your man without needing help. If UConn can defend Alabama, both off the dribble and in their actions, without requiring a secondary defender to come over and help and put themselves in long closeout situations, Alabama has a tendency to settle for tough shots. UConn's got to make them guard, run their own stuff, as Isaac said, be disciplined offensively. Defensively, it's just important. They have to take pride in guarding their own man one-on-one, not requiring that help, not getting into long closeout situations, which will result in those drive and kick threes. As long as that doesn't happen, like I said, I'm not betting against UConn until somebody beats them. All right, fellas, let's move on to the other end of the bracket. NC State, this year's Cinderella, although suddenly it is no longer fashionable to use the word Cinderella, going against Purdue and Zach Edey. So, Isaac, I'm going to start with you on this one. I mean, is this just Purdue all the way, or what does Cinderella have to do to keep dancing here for Kevin Keatts and the Wolfpack?
Well, it's interesting. It's kind of weird because I feel like NC State sneakily matches up decently well with Purdue. Like Purdue starts two bigs and NC State starts two bigs. They have a lot of lead guards. NC State has a lot of lead guard defenders that are playing at a high level. So it's interesting, right? Ever since early February, since Kevin Keatts really changed the lineup up and got Mo Diarra in the starting lineup, this NC State offense ranks 25th nationally. So like they have really started to figure things out. Big part of that is obviously DJ Burns. But for me, it's the other side of the floor. NC State can't win this game unless you bottle up Purdue somehow. And NC State basically plays two different ball screen coverages. When DJ Burns is on the floor, he's in deep drop coverage. So I look at Braden Smith. He's going to get to that elbow jumper, and he's been knocking them down at will all game. But then when DJ Burns subs out, they bring Ben Middlebrooks into the game, and he plays at the level. He could trap ball screens. He's really active. He's tough. He's physical. So I feel like Purdue has to be really, really disciplined, because you're going to see basically two different coverages depending on which big is on the floor. And that's an angle, and an interesting angle, that Kevin Keats has up his sleeve.
All right, Chris, what do you got?
I mean, Zach, you missed your calling as a coach, man. I mean, you got a chance there. You know what's funny? You watch when you play Purdue. I'll make this comment about Cinderella. In the era that we're in now, Cinderella does not exist. Now, I will say this. NC State, who in their right mind would think they would beat Duke twice in the span of 2 weeks, given Duke's brand? But I made this comment before. When they play Duke, it was the old heads at the park versus the young bucks, the wily young bucks. And what they have is they have a ton of transfers who do not see the name on the front of the jersey. They see the name on the back. That's how experienced this team is. And they interviewed DJ Burns after the game. He says, everyone's asking, what is the secret to the turn? He says, everybody start coming on time. And so, and like he was saying stuff like he was being so honest. I'm like, so they may have had some issues in the locker room that they solved between older guys. And because they take transfers, it takes those guys a while to learn. And even the coaches and Kevin Keats, what am I working with? Mm-hmm. So now I fast forward that to now. There's no accident they're doing what they're doing. They look like they're the better team when they play every single time, because they have a bunch of veterans out there that are playing like veterans. Now, against this Purdue team, again, you can say the coverage of DJ Burns, if he can't get in foul trouble, because that'll alter the game. Zach Edey never gets in foul trouble. The one thing that you mentioned before about Ben Middlebrooks and Braden Smith coming off ball screens, and I'm sitting there like pulling my hair out if I had any. And I know these guys are great coaches. I'm like, listen, the handoff and the ball screen is the same. They don't only do it for Braden Smith, they also do it for Fletcher Lawyer, coming off with their right hand every single time. And then if you help, guess what they're going to do? Throw it up to the big fella. So you can't help. You have to trap that screen. They have to talk about drop coverage with DJ Burns, because they're going to kill them on that every single time. Because if he's in a drop and Braden's going downhill, what do you think Zach Edey's doing? He's coming right to the rim. So if DR or anyone helps, they're just throwing it up, and there's nothing that anyone on earth can do in college basketball to stop it. They really have to talk through that. And again, I would guard Zach Edey the exact same way, other than a couple possessions here that Tennessee did. Let him get 40. And I always say this, it's not about him getting 40. The problem was that this guy, Sakai Ziegler, played terrible, right? Jonas Adu played terrible. Every single guy. And Josiah Jordan-James played good, didn't get enough attempts. And Jordan Gainey played good, made a couple shots, didn't get enough attempts. But the guys that they usually depend on, Vescovy, none of those guys did anything. That was the problem. You have to score. You can let Zach Edey get 40. Let him crush every record. Take away all the three-point shots and get back in transition. You win the game if you score. People forget that. That's why I love Alabama. Everyone talks about defense. They forget you still have to score on the other end. So the best defense sometimes is scoring.
You know what, guys? I want to combine those 2 points, because Chris, to your point, other people are going to have to score. And Isaac, you talked about that ball screen coverage. Braden Smith is going to have a ton of open looks, because the most underappreciated part of Zach Edey's game, and we know he's been the most dominant college basketball player in the NCAA for the past 2 seasons, but the thing that we don't talk about is that he is a phenomenal screen setter. So you put DJ Burns back in the lane, and essentially it's a 2-on-1 up at the 3-point line where Edey is crashing into whoever is guarding the Purdue guards. They're going to get to that elbow. They're going to have, whether it's pull-ups from the elbow, if somebody goes under the screen, they're going to have those threes. If they can make that NC State pay for that coverage, that is going to go a long way towards opening up the game for everyone else on Purdue, and potentially draw NC State into a different type of coverage. Chris was saying they need to trap, but that to me is a first domino in how these coaches handle this chess match. When Burns is going soft coverage and he comes up and sets a monster screen, if Purdue's guards are making shots, how does NC State counter? All right, final point. Chris, who are you taking in this one?
Listen, I got to go with Purdue. I mean, it's a team of destiny. Matt Painter's been much maligned. I've been one of them that's jumped on them. and I'm happy for his success. I love Kevin Keats in that story. I know much is going to be made about Valvano, but in this industry, and it's just a one and done industry, it's a tough industry. Transfer portal, you guys covered a lot. It is very difficult to amass a team. And as I mentioned about Nate Oates, now I think last year, you guys correct me, next year is the last year of the COVID seniors because there are COVID seniors on NC State's team. The question is, what will be the model after that? Because this has significantly helped NC State get to where they are. And a lot of people don't realize that they look at Alabama's roster with Grant Nelson, with Mark Sears, Aaron Estrada, with Wrightsell. All those guys are transfers. Yep. And that has helped those two teams get to the Final Four similarly the way it helped San Diego State last year. I say that to say the most complete team, the deepest team with the force inside and the three-point shooting, I'm taking Purdue.
All right, Isaac, who you got?
Yeah, it's funny, right? NC State, all transfers. Purdue has one transfer. It's just a very different teams build. I think it's a really good example that you can build teams in different ways and have success in the modern era. But give me Purdue in this spot. And the other aspect that I was really looking at too is Trey Kaufman-Renn. I think he's going to have a big imprint on this game, the four-man for Purdue. He is terrific in post-up opportunities. NC State very rarely doubles post-ups. I think he's going to have some really interesting matchups one-on-one when they give Zach Edey a break. Trey Kaufman-Renn is proven to be a really, really impactful back-to-the-basket big man. He's going to, if he can give them 8 to 10 points, I think that's a game changer for them. Simply put, honestly, I just feel like there's way more avenues for Purdue to score on NC State than vice versa. So just give me the best team here. I feel like we're on a collision course for Purdue and UConn. I think we get it.
I would agree with you. And as I've said, I don't know, I've been saying it for the last month repeatedly. This is a Purdue team that is vastly different from last year's team. Last year's team started 2 freshmen in the backcourt. Those freshmen are now sophomores. Last year's team was not a good three-point shooting team. This year's team leads the country in three-point shooting. Last year's team was very slow, one of the slowest teams in college basketball. This year's team, even though they're playing inside out with Edey, is about middle of the pack in tempo, and they still have the most dominant big man, the most dominant player in all of college basketball. So just like I said about UConn, I'm picking Purdue until someone beats them. That would set us up for this much anticipated final. And guys, we got to be real quick with this one. If it comes down to Purdue versus UConn, Chris, give me your 20-second winner.
I mean, obviously I'm going to go with the Big East. I'm going with Danny Hurley and UConn. That's going to be a phenomenal game. Mount Edey versus Kling Kong. And it's going to be a throwback to the old college basketball, but I'm taking the depth of UConn and the Big East.
Isaac, who you got?
I would take UConn in that one too. I think Cam Spencer and Tristan Newton outplay Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer, barely.
All right. The thing I will say about this Donovan Clingan, Zach Edey matchup, and this is for the fans out there. A lot of people are asking me if Zach Edey is the best player in college basketball, how is Donovan Clingan now considered the best NBA prospect? The thing for fans to know is that while they are both massive, while Edey is probably, as Chris pointed out early, the more dominant interior scorer in the college game, what differentiates them for NBA purposes is the mobility factor. Clingan runs the floor exceptionally well. He reacts quicker on the defensive end. He's got more agile hips, and it's that mobility factor along with the potential away from the basket offensively that really differentiates those two players. I wanted to make that point quick because that's a question that has come up for the people who are just starting to tune into March Madness and saying, hold on, Edey's dominating, but Clingan's atop the draft boards. Why is that? So we wanted to break that down quickly for those fans. Having said that, I do think Edey would be a tough head-to-head matchup for Clingan if they meet on Monday night. And so to Isaac's point, I think UConn's guards will have to counter and come up in a big way. But it is going to be a lot of fun beginning this Saturday night in Phoenix with the finals tipping off on Sunday. Remember, it all gets going. NC State taking on Purdue. The tip is scheduled for 6:09 p.m. Eastern time. And Alabama facing UConn at 8:49. Both games will be on TBS. But now we're going to talk about some of the power programs that did not make the Final Four and whether or not they've reached some pivot points in the offseason. And guys, want to start this conversation with the team that was hoping to play on their somewhat of a home court this weekend, and that's Arizona. Talking about playing in Phoenix in front of the home fans, it seemed like they had a chance to do it. Everybody's talking about now how Tommy Floyd has now gotten, quote unquote, upset all 3 years at Arizona. Does he need to change anything with the philosophy is a question that is being asked. Isaac, I'm going to start with you. What are your thoughts on Arizona?
Yeah, I just feel like they didn't get good enough guard play. And I don't know if that's on Tommy Lloyd. I just felt like Caleb Love didn't help them when they needed him most in the NCAA tournament. And Kylan Boswell really struggled down the stretch in certain spots. He was just really inconsistent. Remember, he's really young too, just a reclassification guy, second year. But he's really, I don't think he's even turned 20 yet. So he's a young guy. And so it feels like as Arizona heads into this offseason, if you rework this backcourt, they have a top 5 recruiting class coming in. Arizona is going to recruit the portal at a really, really high level. This is going to be a team that is going to give themselves another bite at the apple, and the guard play just has to get better. Like, is Pelle Larsson, is he back? Is Caleb Love back? Boswell has to make a decision whether he's staying or entering the portal. I still really like Jaden Bradley. I think KJ Lewis has a really bright future. You get a decent amount of those guys back and maybe head into the portal and get a big-time player or two, depending on who stays or who goes. I think Arizona's right in the mix. Like, sometimes we get so caught up in some of these early March exits and lose a bigger picture of like where the program is headed. This program's really healthy. I think they're really close, honestly, to making a Final Four run.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I echo some of the same points, but for me, and I know you say he's young, and I know, Fink, you were talking about the difference between Klingon and Zach Edey, and there's much of my animus towards the NBA in the way, I don't want to say they poison the well, that they decide what player is a better prospect when they cannot compete or dominate the college game. So when I grew up, the Ewings, the Mornings, those guys were great college players, and they end up being great NBA players, and the role has flipped based on potential of what you can be. So a Kylan Boswell, you look at his draft status, some people have him higher up in the draft, and then a Caleb Love, and I'm like, okay, but Kylan Boswell or Elliot Cadeau, we'll talk about later, these guys can't dominate in college basketball at all, but yet you poison the well, making these people think they can lead. Kylan Boswell, to me, is the problem with Arizona. And again, whoever stays, player retention is almost bigger, shall I say, than the portal. I even looked through the portal this morning, and I'm like, okay, what kid makes a difference? You look at Carolina, again, we'll talk about them. They got some guys out of the portal that weren't successful, the teams that they came from, and they fit nicely. You become more of a GM than a recruiter now, but you have to have you have to really understand lineup optimization and have a nucleus in place, which is what Arizona has. They have a great nucleus. The question is what pieces fit, because some of those European players they got, I don't know how good those guys are. People can talk about Europe all they want. I don't know how many European players come in college basketball and dominate or at a high level. Name them, I don't know. I'm sure there's a handful, but at the end of the day, KJ Lewis, Jaden Bradley, they need better roles. But Kylan Boswell, or that position, they need better at that position.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would say this, though, guys. I think this Arizona program is just fine. And some of these critiques of Tommy Lloyd are coming from the people who don't watch college basketball until March Madness begins. And I get it. This is what you are judged by in college basketball. It's almost unfortunate because I do think it's a better measure of the quality of your program, how you do in the regular season, than how you do in March, because so much is unpredictable in March. And if you look at the quality of their regular season, Arizona was one of 3 teams in the country to finish in both the top 10 in offense and in defense. Now, one of the things we talked about last week going into the Sweet 16 is that they had a few really bad games over the course of this, 30-plus game schedule where you just couldn't figure out what happened to them on this given night. I think some of that comes down to the guard play you guys were talking about, and it comes down to having ball movers. You get a guy like Caleb Love, he's a shot jacker. And I think similar to what we saw at North Carolina a year before, when this Arizona team was moving the ball and getting high percentage shots, then you saw the total buy-in from everybody, and it permeated to both sides of the floor. When you have guys who jack shots, it can be a little bit of a culture killer. And I'm not putting all that on one player. I just think the more the ball moves, the better this team was. And if there is a tweak, it's going to be very slight, and it's to making sure they have good ball movement to make sure they are connected on both ends of the floor. That's my final takeaway. All right, now we're going to pivot, no pun intended, to Duke. This is a team that, listen, when you get to the Elite Eight, there's not many programs in the country that would call that a disappointing season, but Duke is probably one of them. They had a game on their home court to win a share of the ACC regular season championship against their rival, North Carolina. North Carolina beat them on their home court and took away that championship, won it single-handedly themselves. Then they're in the ACC tournament. They get upset by North Carolina State. They don't win that. Then seemingly they get a little lucky when Jamal Shed goes down with the injury. They make it to the Elite Eight, have NC State in their path again. NC State upsets them again and takes them away from the Final Four. So I ask you now, given that they still had a tremendous season by everyone else's standards, is there anything they need to do a little differently next year? Chris, I will start with you.
Listen, by Duke standards, that's a tremendous year. Obviously, they believe in Durham, they should be in the Final Four every single season. And I want to, before I make my comments, I want to say in his second year following the legend, Shire's done a tremendous job. Not an easy job to take over and continue to win at a high level, which I believe he has done given the circumstances. But this is what I'll say, and I'll be somewhat critical here. You play Vermont, you play JMU, right? And you play a shedless Houston, and then you're in the Elite Eight. And then you have an 11 seed to go to the Final Four. In Jon Scheyer's career, it will never be that easy again. It will never be that fortuitous again to get to the Final Four, period. A team like North Carolina State lost 4 games at the end of the season. That's who you have to go to the Final Four, right? I don't know if any other team, no Duke team, has ever been in a situation like that. That being said, they're going to lose Filipowski. They're going to lose McCain, right? And Tyrese Proctor, for all the hype, this is my thing about the NBA and about how they hype these kids that play in the McDonald's game. 0 for 9 in that game. And I know he held them hostage to stay like, I got to do this, I got to do that. And to your point earlier about Caleb Love being a shot jacker, you know why he's a shot jacker? But Kylan Boswell can't get anybody a shot. He's not a driving kick guy, and neither is Jeremy Roach. So that's what I'm saying. Lineup optimization is huge. Who are you pairing these guys with? I love Duke, but sometimes they're Atlanta misfit toys. Sean Stewart, great recruit, can't play him. Mark Mitchell, just an athlete. These guys are all hype, 5-star guys. You put too many of these guys together, and they're standing around looking at each other. And again, it looks good on paper, but when you put them in a phone booth against a Houston, against a team that's tough, like, Carolina has some toughness this year, it gets tougher. Now, they're bringing in Cooper Flagg. Unbelievable player. I love Cooper Flagg. Not saying he's overhyped or whatever it is. It's going to be more of the same if the coaching staff doesn't figure out the pieces. Ton of talent, but this is not the old NCAA where you can have 5 guys that are 5-star guys, and that means you're going to make it to the Final Four. That's just what I believe. I love Duke, but at the end of the day, there's a little bit something they're going to have to figure out other than having a great recruiting class.
Telling hard truths. Isaac, what do you got?
Well, and I just feel like when you get Cooper Flagg in your building for a year, you got to make that count. Like, this year is really, really important, and it starts right now. This offseason is everything. And I think Caleb Foster's injury was a really big deal. I'm a big fan of his. I think he's going to be a really terrific piece for them moving forward because spacing around Flagg is going to be vastly important. But it really comes down to retention again for the second offseason in a row. This recruiting class is awesome. It's Flagg coming in, but you also have 2 other 5-star big men that are going to really change the front court. Where is room for Sean Stewart? Is there room for Mark Mitchell? I think you probably have room for maybe one of them, but I don't know if you can get both of them back, right? What happens if Tyrese Proctor wants to come back? Like, yes, he's had some struggles down the stretch, but he had also some really interesting moments defensively where he had some big-time stops late in that game against Houston. I would want him back for a 3rd year because I still think that there's a ceiling for him that changes your program. And Jared McCain, do you have to go overboard with him in NIL to try to see if you can get him back for a 2nd year? I don't think you should. I think he's a lottery pick. I think he's a really, really good player. And so if you're, and the other thing too is can you get Jeremy Roach back for a 5th season? There's a lot of these different options here where you have to find the right spacing around Flagg. And you have to hit on this backcourt, and it starts right now with retention or in the portal. And this is as big an offseason as Jon Scheyer's ever had because you have a generational freshman coming in that you can't waste that opportunity.
And, it seems like every offseason from the time he was named head coach in waiting has been a critical one for Jon Scheyer. And to his credit, he has answered the call each and every offseason. I expect he will do so again this season. The thing that we don't talk about in retrospect is how well they did with player retention last year, getting Kyle Filipowski back, getting Tyrese Proctor back. I think that's going to be, and Isaac, you alluded to this just then, I think that's going to be a key theme of this year too, this offseason, because one of the things we've seen, John Calipari spoke about this, is that it's hard to win with just freshmen now. Well, Mark Mitchell, Tyrese Proctor, those guys are not in position to be 1st-round picks right now unless something dramatically changes in the pre-draft process. they're better off coming back to school. Jeremy Roach, the same is true for him. I think Jared McCain, whether or not he's a lottery pick, remains to be seen. He's got a chance, but I think he's gone. Flip, same thing, fringe lottery pick, he's gone. And it's going to be much easier for Cooper Flagg in that class, because it's not just Cooper Flagg, that class to come in if they have some veteran leadership. But I will say this too. I think the thing this class was missing, or this year's team was missing, was just a little nasty. Like they lacked a little bit of toughness. I know I'm preaching to the choir here with you, Chris. A little extra athleticism they didn't have. It was just that edge. And if you're Duke and you know you are the biggest brand in college basketball and you're going to get everybody's top shot every given night, you got to have that edge. You got to have that athleticism. You got to have that toughness when you come in. And I think if those players come back and they can hopefully step into leadership roles and still allow for the individual talent of Cooper Flagg and the rest of this class to show through, I think that's an ideal scenario for Duke. But I hope that, to Chris's point, guys like Mitchell and Proctor don't get anchored to what people like myself wondered if they could become when the season began, because that's just not where we're currently at this point in the process. All right, speaking of the one and done battle, we're going to end this pivot point with we're going to go next to Kentucky. John Calipari speaking after that loss to Oakland. Chris, if you were hard on John Shire, I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this. Said maybe he has to pivot away from the one and done model. Guys, here's my thing on this. He has pivoted away from the one and done model. There have been, of the 10 Kentucky starters in the last 2 years, 6 of them have been transfers. Last year's team started 4 transfers. There were 2 on this year's roster. So yes, guys like Reed Shepherd and Rob Dillingham were huge players, but Reed Shepherd didn't even start until the last 5 games of the season after he dropped 32 against Mississippi State. Reed Shepherd had to play his way into the role he had because he was not expected to do it. So my question, and Chris, I'll start with you, like, what needs to change at Kentucky for this to get back to the standards that they have for that program?
It's like fighting with John Rothstein saying that if Matt Painter doesn't make the Final Four, it's a colossal failure. Okay, well then fire him then. Because it's so easy to get to the Final Four, Zach. I mean, Isaac, you know what I'm saying? It's so easy. What it comes down to is this. There's nothing wrong with having too much talent. Similar to Duke, and Isaac, you just really phrased it, all the different players they have coming in. The question is, how do you assemble the pieces? That is what it's all about. You're fighting with putting Wagner Jr. in there, and at the end of the day, he's not better than Reed Shepherd, so you're fighting that in the locker room. You got Trey Mitchell. You got Big Z. You're fighting so many things that have nothing to do with basketball. And then when you get on the court, when you need them most, all they can draw from is, I was McDonald's All-American. I had Finkelstein talking about me for the last 4 years. So I got to be the guy. And again, then all of a sudden, guess what happens? Dillingham and Reed Shepherd, they upset the apple cart because now their draft status is better than Wagner and Edwards. You got a lot of issues you're dealing with there. Big Z plays one game, then you don't see him anymore. So you got so many things at Kentucky. What is wrong with the formula that they had? They're one of the best teams in college basketball. At the end of the day, couldn't guard a ball screen against Gonzaga. And you lose to Jack Golke, who everyone says, well, how could you not guard him? Guys, he averaged 12 points a game in Horizon. Give me a break. Come on, Cal, some of this is on you. Some of this is on you and how you run your program. It's not the players you're bringing in. So let me get this right, Cal. So as you mentioned, Vic, you want to go get Sabia Wheeler again? You want those type of players coming in your program instead of having John Wall, the type of players? I don't understand when you lose at the end of the year and in the NCAA tournament, only one team, and Isaac, you know, there's only one team's going to win the NCAA tournament, right? Houston is upset right now as Kevin Sampson because it wasn't a fair fight because he didn't have shit. That's all they're going to think about. These guys lost to Oakland. He should be embarrassed, and he should not be looking at the players in the model. He should look in the mirror and be like, listen, man, I cannot let this happen again. I don't give a damn what those guys are out there thinking, because if they're not guarding the ball screen or Jack Golke the way they should, that's on me because I got enough weapons to make it happen.
Yeah, I simply thought that Kentucky didn't have enough two-way players. And so that's my big thing going and moving forward, right? In the portal and with your roster construction moving forward, you cannot have enough two-way guys. And that's why it concerns me, to be honest, that Adu Thiero transferred and entered the portal. He was the exact type of player I'd want to keep around. Tough, reliable, played hard. I felt like I knew what I was getting out of him. Active on the glass, could guard multiple positions. Seemed like he didn't care if the ball wasn't in his hands, drove the basketball, wasn't trying to settle for fun step back 18-foot jumpers all the time. So like heading into the portal, I think they have to get a big man that can guard and also give them some low post presence. So a two-way big man, a two-way wing would really, really help too. And I still think that they could really use a veteran lead guard that can, set the table and also play some defense too. Because you cannot have, so many one-way guys. They had so many guys that were elite on one end of the floor and left a lot to be wanting on the other end. And you just can't win in college basketball that way.
Good luck in the portal finding that guy. I look through the portal. Good luck finding that guy that's going to go to Big Blue Nation and excel at that level. I'm looking through the portal. I'm like, who is that guy? You know what I mean?
Severe Wheeler's not walking through that door. I got a little bit of a hot take on Kentucky, and I will leave you with this. I think Kentucky overachieved this year. What do you think about that? Like at the beginning of the season, the talking point was, is this freshman class good enough to rely on to get Kentucky back to where they need to be? Because we had questions, despite how good they were in high school, about DJ Wagner, Aaron Bradshaw, Justin Edwards, not in terms of them as prospects, although now it looks like the questions should have extended to that, but about whether or not they were ready to help you win college basketball games. It turned out that Reed Shepherd and Robert Dillingham were, in fact, to be honest with you, when I look back at our recruiting rankings from last year, I think we got them largely right. The only misnomers, not the only ones, but the glaring ones, all went to Kentucky. The 3 5-star kids who went to Kentucky weren't as good as we thought, and the 2 4-star guys were way better. So they were all inverted. Outside of those 5 players, you look back at last year's recruiting rankings, and we got the vast majority of it right. So there was something very unexpected going on in Lexington this year, and I think they actually overachieved, given what the expectations were going into the season. I will also say this, moving forward, listen, no one is better at marketing their program than Cal. And at the end of the day, I think he knows that he's invested in transfers, and it was just important to have a talking point after that game. If you look at roster construction for the teams that are consistently the best in this day and age, they have a combination of elite high school recruits and elite transfer work. It's not one or the other. It's both. You combine them both together. I don't know that you can win with 3 freshmen on the floor. To Cal's point, I don't know that you can have continuity with 5 first-year transfers on the floor either. So you've got to have some continuity. You do that with some multi-year transfers. You do that with some impact recruits. And to me, that is the best formula for roster construction. I expect that to be something that we'll see more of from Kentucky, certainly next year, and then we'll see what happens beyond that. Gentlemen, as always, thank you for joining the show. For more analysis, don't forget to visit 247sports.com. And we will have everything from this coming Final Four, as well as the transfer portal and much, much more. Now, I was in Houston over the weekend for the lead up to the McDonald's All-American game, along with my 247 Sports colleagues, Eric Bossi and Travis Branham. And now we're going to break down what we saw during that game, as Ebos will join me here, the national basketball director for 247 Sports. Ebos, thank you for jumping on. You are still in Houston, going to the game tonight. So let's just summarize for everybody here. We started on Saturday night. There was the opening practice. Sunday morning, another practice, followed by the scrimmage that was on national TV. Monday morning, we had the third practice, which was the 4th evaluation setting for NBA scouts. Now, the vast majority of scouts then left Houston, although the game itself is still on tonight. So, Bossi, I want to ask you first, given that some of the major evaluating has already taken place, who are some of the players who have impressed you thus far in Houston?
Well, I think we have to start with the debate that's raging everywhere with this Cooper Flagg and Ace Bailey. These two have entered into the end of the week as the number 1 and number 2 players in the country. And I think they've backed that up and have opened a serious discussion about who is ultimately going to end up the number 1 player in the class, one that we've been having internally and one that, the NBA guys we were with certainly started to have. So those guys stand out. No surprise there, right? I think some of the other people that come up would be, Liam McNeely has had some good times. Trent McNeely has had good times. VJ Edgecombe headed to Baylor is one that has been really, really good. Drake Powell, Ian Jackson, Jaleel Bethea, Donnie Freeman. There's a lot of guys we can really start anywhere.
All right, let's dig into this a little bit. The battle for the number one is obviously the big talking point, and I will concede I am open to various opinions here. You and Travis and I, we've been talking about it all week. We started to gauge the opinions of NBA scouts throughout the course of the week. One of the best answers I had was walking out of the scrimmage on Sunday. Now, full disclosure, the scouts that I trust are the ones who have the best understanding of high school basketball. And I think you'll see and perhaps agree with this, perhaps you would agree with this, that not every scout follows high school basketball enough to have a truly educated opinion on it right now. But there are some that really dig into the high school level. I asked one of those scouts walking out of the scrimmage on Sunday, I said, Cooper or Ace? And he looks at me and goes, you want a guaranteed triple or do you want to try and hit the home run? And I think that's a pretty good explanation of where we're at right now, is that, like, listen, these all-star settings are not what Cooper Flagg is built for. He's built for winning basketball games on both ends of the floor, the best help defender in the class, has an impeccable resume of winning. As soon as this McDonald's game is over on Tuesday night, he and his two teammates will head to Indianapolis and try and win Chipotle Nationals, which they will be heavily favored to do. But to say it plainly, while he's been solid this week, he hasn't had the wow moment that I think most people expected, given how popular he is and how prevalent his brand is. Ace Bailey has had some of those moments, although I will say, I'm not sure even he has been quite as electric as we've seen at various points this season. So I'll frame it to you like this. How do you feel about that analogy, like the guaranteed triple versus the swinging for the fences on the home run?
I see where someone's coming from, and this is something that goes back to, I think I first brought this up watching Ace when I went to watch his first practice of his high school season, his junior year. At that point, I thought in my mind that we had a guy that was legitimately going to contend for the number one spot. And he's consistently put up huge numbers. He's just been off the beaten path a little bit more. You've got Cooper Flagg has played in the EYBL. He plays at Montverde. He gets all the exposure. Ace Bailey played for an independent team. He wasn't on a shoe circuit. McEachern, while it's a power in Atlanta and made the state championship game, hasn't been invited to every national event. They're not playing in the EYBL Scholastic League. So he doesn't get the benefit of being seen as much. So there's that. But I think Ace Bailey is a pretty safe bet. I don't look at him as some guy who's boom or bust or you're swinging for the fences by going for him. This guy is a monster talent. And whether you like Cooper or him, that's still up for debate. But I think that if there's a narrative being created that Cooper is more of a safe thing, a sure thing than Ace, I think that's completely wrong in my mind.
You know what I think is really interesting about this is that when you ask people, you get very different opinions. And that I think is representative of where we are. And it's also representative sometimes of what we have on the group, because again, we are projecting a futures market. We're trying to figure out who's got the best chance to be the best player down the road. And because we're projecting a futures market, there is no right or wrong answer. There's just the educated kind of stance on the probability that one outcome could be more likely than the other. All right, that having been said, Boss, I want to ask you about Liam McNeely. Liam McNeely had the buzzer-beating three-point shot with 0.3 of a second left in the scrimmage. I always thought it required 4 seconds, but hey, I'm a big fan of Liam, so I was supportive of that call. He decommitted from Indiana last month now. You had a chance to catch up with him in Houston. What's the latest on his recruitment?
Yeah, so Liam obviously decommitted from Indiana here a couple of weeks ago after signing with them in the fall, and opened things back up. And as soon as he opened things up, the immediate speculation was that Kansas was in the driver's seat and Kansas is going to be the team to beat. And I do think that Kansas is certainly in the mix, particularly if Johnny Furphy decides to enter the NBA draft. That would really benefit their chances with him. But, he's a very focused guy and said, right now, I'm focused on the McDonald's game. I've got Chipotle Nationals coming up after that with Montverde, and then I'm going to get back to the recruitment on this thing. I think one school that stands out to me to maybe keep an eye on would be UConn. I've heard some really good rumblings with them and what they're doing in there. Kentucky is trying to make a run. You mentioned Michigan, Texas, and some others. But Kansas, until we find out what happens with Johnny Furphy, I think is the team in the best standing. But like I said, their chances go way up with Furphy leaving, and might be a little bit tougher if he sticks around. And also, they're starting to get active in the transfer portal. I don't think they're going to sit around and wait on him per se, and I think he'd like to take his time. But, there'll be more coming out, but Kansas, UConn, Kentucky are a few of the ones that are standing out right now.
Yeah, he's got his choice of the biggest blue bloods there are after decommitting from Indiana. Another player that is back on the market is Trent Perry from Harvard Westlake in California. He was previously committed to USC. Of course, it was the worst kept secret in the college coaching world that Andy Enfield was going to take the SMU job as soon as his buyout dropped. That buyout did drop this week, and now that news is official, meaning Trent Perry has formally announced that he is going to reopen his recruitment. What is the latest on his process?
Well, Trent actually, pardon me if I missed something, during the media sessions yesterday, said he had no comment on his status with USC. But I think we all know that with the coaching change, he's going to have to wait around to see the new coaches, but they're going to have their work cut out for him in re-recruiting him. And if he does decide to open things up, he'll be a very hot prospect. He's a guy that we have ranked number 52 in the country right now, who I think is making a pretty strong case to move up after an incredible high school year, and certainly looking like he belongs here at the McDonald's All-American game. Gonzaga was really, really strong with him during the recruiting process, so maybe they might be someone to look to. But for right now, he is a firm no comment, and the people around him are firm no comments. And speaking to some sources around him, at least as of yesterday afternoon, they were saying that he wanted to see who gets hired at USC before making any official announcement on anything.
Yeah, I think he did formalize that on social media earlier this morning and took the the path of just not wanting to speak about it publicly, but has posted something now so that we know he is reopening his recruitment. So he'll be one to watch. Last one, similar situation with the coaching change. Zoom Diallo headed home to Washington, initially committed to Mike Hopkins. Obviously, Danny Sprinkle is in as the new head coach of the Huskies. You caught up with Zoom. How will the coaching change impact his future at his home state university?
I think maybe more important than the coaching change at top, when this all comes down to the end of things, is the coaching change and the assistants. Will Conroy was an assistant coach that Zoom was very close with and played a huge part in securing Zoom's commitment, and he's not going to be continuing with the Washington staff. Of course, Will played there, has been on staff forever. So that's a big factor, and it's something that I think Sprinkle and his staff may ultimately have to overcome with things. Now, Zoom told me that his family has met with Danny Sprinkle. He hasn't been able to meet with him in person yet, but he's done some FaceTimes with him and is starting to get a feel for him, and he's trying to see what's going on as well. But the thing with the Zoom, and I think him and his family understand, is if he's going to open things up, he's going to have to make sure that he has a place in mind that he's going before opening things up, because with the transfer portal out there and things moving quickly, even as highly celebrated as he is, if you open things up without a plan and just to anyone who wants to get involved, it might be really hard to find a good fit because there's just so many moving pieces right now. So I think with coaching changes, more often than not, we know where this thing eventually ends up going, but he is a local kid. I think there's probably some pretty nice NIL things in place locally that may be tough to compete with elsewhere. So there's going to be some work to do. I think they have a chance to keep him, but it's certainly not something that's locked up.
All right, boss, before we close it out, the last question I want to ask you is who helped themselves the most this week? I have a player that I will bring up first, and that's Donnie Freeman, who is committed to Syracuse. And I noticed from the very first practice when everyone was walking out on Saturday night, and you see it's normal that players embellish their measurements a little bit. But what we saw is that not everyone listed at 6'8" or 6'9" is 6'8" or 6'9". Donnie Freeman was listed at 6'8" in the McDonald's measurements. And I can tell you he is every bit of 6'9", if not bigger. This guy has legit size, and he has been shooting the ball really, really well all weekend long, showing he's going to be a legitimate pick and pop threat. Remember, he's got a firm resume of winning. This is a guy who won a WCAC championship as a junior at St. John's College High School in Washington, D.C. Then he went to Team Takeover, won an EYBL championship, and now he's at IMG, where he too will compete in Chipotle Nationals. He showed mobility as a big man that I think is going to be very valuable at Syracuse. And the thing with Donnie is we've seen his talent since he was an underclassman, but there's been a very linear progression as he continues to turn potential into production, and we saw increased evidence of that this week. He, to me, was a player who really helped himself. Who do you like, Boss? Who stood out to you as someone who helped themselves this week?
Yeah, well, you took a little bit of my fire there going with Donnie Freeman because he's one that really, really stuck out to me. I saw yesterday you put some stuff out on social media about Boogie Fland, who I thought has had a very strong couple of days here, especially as a guy where we weren't really sure, is he a point guard, is he a shooting guard, where does he fit in? I think he's showing around other high level players with high level teammates that he can be a table setter while also being a threat as a jump shooter. And then we mentioned the now officially decommitted Trent Perry. My apologies for missing that. Been locked up in meetings all day. He really stood out to me. Like, I think he's a guy that, like I said, more than proven he belongs. Had an incredible run through the state championships. He's backed up here. He looks much bigger than I thought he was. You know, he's always been kind of lean, but he's adding some strength. He's just really poised. He's been knocking down shots. He's really good at getting into the paint and making the right read and finding guys either as cutters or shooters out on the wings. So those are the guys that kind of stand out to me.
All right, final point for me. I thought there was a trio of 5-star prospects that all showed well. Ian Jackson was very good throughout the course of the week, making shots, making it very evident that he has made strides with his shooting. VJ Edgecombe had a lot of the NBA scouts talking, showing his explosive athleticism along with the increased skill that has been on full display this year. He's also one of the better perimeter defenders in the class. So I think VJ is someone who left with quite a bit of NBA attention that he can try and parlay into his freshman year at Baylor. And we know what kind of history they have producing one-and-done players. The last 5-star who I thought was impressive was Flory Badunga. The big fella was on a different level in terms of his athleticism and mobility for his size, his ability to change ends, to move laterally, to switch onto guards and still contain them off the dribble. And then, of course, he is explosive athletically like no other big man in the class. That was all immediately obvious this week in Houston. So going to be very interested to see how he does. Make sure you check out the 247 Sports channel because E-Boss caught up with Flory to talk about that Florida fit. Bossy, I know you're staying for the game tonight. I hope it's a good one. And as always, we appreciate you joining us here on the show. Everybody, it's a big week coming up, not just at 247 Sports, but across all the CBS platforms. Make sure you follow us online, 247sports.com, the 247 Sports channel. You can also see my exclusive interview with Cooper Flagg from Houston. He is the top-ranked prospect in the national class. That is available now on the 247 Sports YouTube channel. It will also be airing on CBS Sports HQ. And as always, thank you so much for watching the 247 Sports College Basketball Show. We will see you next time.